You wake up every morning, but you don't really wake up, do you? Your eyes open, yet the weight of yesterday presses down on your chest before you even move. The failure you keep replaying, the argument you wish you could undo, the dream you're afraid is slipping away, they are waiting for you at the edge of the bed, pulling you back into the same storm. For most people, mornings aren't a beginning. They are a continuation of unfinished battles. But the Stoics knew a different way. They saw each morning as a kind of rebirth, a sacred chance to begin again. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself every dawn that simply waking up was a gift. Epictetus taught that the first thoughts of the day decide the shape of the day, and Seneca believed that wasting the morning was to waste the only life you truly own. What if mornings weren't about rushing, scrolling, or drowning in yesterday's noise, but about reclaiming total control of your mind? What if you could rise not as a victim of circumstance, but as the author of your own state of being? This video is not about productivity hacks or miracle routines. It is about the art of waking up with clarity, strength, and unshakable calm. Over the next 7 steps, you will discover how ancient Stoic wisdom, combined with modern psychology, can turn your mornings into a daily practice of inner mastery. Part 1. The first battle is within. When Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength," he was not writing for scholars or philosophers. He was writing to himself in the quiet hours of the morning, when the greatest enemy he faced was not an army beyond the walls of Rome, but the unrest within his own mind. And you know this enemy well, every morning. Before the world demands anything from you, before your phone begins to buzz, before your family or your work pulls you in all directions, there is already a conflict stirring inside. The first battle is not with others. It is with your own thoughts. Think of how often this battle begins the moment you open your eyes. You remember the task you forgot yesterday. You feel the weight of a conversation that didn't go well. You imagine the stack of responsibilities waiting for you like storm clouds at the edge of the day. Without even stepping out of bed, you already feel behind. Psychology calls this the negativity bias, the tendency of the human mind to dwell more intensely on what is wrong than on what is right. To the Stoics, this was the untrained mind rebelling against itself, poisoning the morning before it had even begun. But here is the truth Marcus understood. Those first thoughts are not fate, they are only visitors. To believe them blindly is to hand over the keys of your day before you even begin living it. The Stoics practiced something radical. They named their thoughts, exposed them, and reminded themselves that most fears are shadows cast larger than life. When Marcus told himself that today is new and nothing has yet been decided, he was creating space between thought and action. Between fear and choice, modern psychology echoes this wisdom. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most proven tools against anxiety, begins with catching distorted thoughts before they color your emotions. The belief that today will be a disaster is not a fact. It is a guess, a prediction dressed up as truth. And predictions, no matter how convincing, are not reality. The simple act of noticing, of saying to yourself, "This is only a thought," loosens its grip. In that small pause, you begin to reclaim your mind. You don't need to be an emperor or a general to know what this feels like. Imagine an ordinary morning. The alarm rings, and before you rise, your mind is already spinning. You think about the meeting where you might be criticized, or the overdue bill waiting on your desk. Maybe it's a memory of a small mistake you made yesterday that now feels larger in the light of dawn. These thoughts creep in quietly, but their weight can shape your whole day if you let them. Yet if you pause even for a breath and remind yourself, this is just a thought, not a fact, you create a gap. And in that gap, you discover freedom. Think of a parent who wakes early, already worried about how to juggle work and family. already imagining conflicts that may never even happen. If that parent can stop for a moment, sit at the edge of the bed, breathe, and remind themselves, "I will meet what comes, not what my mind invents," then the day begins not with panic, but with calm. Or think of a student lying awake, fearing an exam, convinced they will fail. If they can catch that thought, "This is fear, not prophecy," then they have already won a victory. One that will steady them when they finally sit at the desk with pen in hand. This is the daily practice of Stoicism, not the absence of difficult thoughts, but the refusal to let them rule you. Tomorrow morning when you wake, notice the first thought that rises. Do not fight it, do not suppress it, simply name it. This is only a thought. I choose what it means. That small shift is powerful. It is the difference between being carried away by the current and learning to swim. The first battle each day is invisible, but once you recognize it, you are no longer its victim. You see that mornings are not about rushing, not about how quickly you answer the world's demands, but about whether you begin the day as master of your mind or captive to it. If you can win that quiet fight before anyone else even knows you are awake, you step into the day with a strength no one else can touch. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, but it is real. It is the quiet power of a person who rules themselves before the world has the chance to rule them. Part 2. Guarding the gate of your mind. The Stoics often described the mind as a fortress. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." What he meant was simple but radical. Your mind is not an open market where anyone can throw in their noise, worries, or opinions. It is a citadel, and every morning you stand at its gate, whether you realize it or not. You decide what gets inside. For most of us, that first decision is unconscious. The alarm rings, the hand reaches automatically for the phone, and before our bodies are even fully awake, the fortress doors are wide open. Notifications, headlines, opinions, emails, they rush in like a mob. Without realizing it, we surrender the key to our gate, and we feel the cost almost immediately. On mornings when scrolling is our first act, the tone of the day shifts. Our thoughts scatter, a low-grade anxiety hums in the background, and we feel behind before we've even started. By mid-morning, it feels as though the day owns us, not the other way around. The Stoics would call this a failure of discipline. Epictetus once said, "If someone handed your body over to a stranger, you'd be furious. Yet you hand over your mind to anyone who comes along, and you aren't ashamed of it." Replace stranger with the endless flood of digital noise. And you can see how little has changed across 2,000 years. Modern psychology explains why this is so destabilizing. Every time you check a notification, your brain releases dopamine, a small chemical hit of stimulation, not true satisfaction. The problem is this little jolt conditions your brain to crave more. Instead of beginning your day with clarity, you begin with craving and reactivity, and research shows it's not harmless. Studies on focus reveal that it can take nearly 25 minutes to fully recover concentration after even a small distraction. Imagine what happens when the first hour of your day is broken into dozens of these micro-distractions. Your fortress walls are not guarded, they are breached. Now, picture a different kind of morning, one you've probably had at least once. Maybe it was on vacation or on a rare weekend without an alarm. You woke slowly, without rushing, and instead of grabbing your phone, you simply sat with yourself. Maybe you stretched, maybe you brewed coffee, maybe you just looked out the window at the stillness. That hour felt different, didn't it? There was a calmness, a sense of control. The day unfolded from the inside out, not the outside in. That is what it means to guard the gate of your mind. Guarding the gate doesn't require silence forever, nor does it mean cutting yourself off from the world. It means choosing when and how the world enters. The Stoics practiced a short morning reflection, preparing the mind before stepping into society. Seneca would rehearse the difficulties he might face, so that when insults or frustrations came, he was not ambushed by them. In modern terms, this is called cognitive priming, shaping your mental environment before outside influences do it for you. Here is a simple experiment to try tomorrow. Before you go to bed, place your phone across the room or switch it to airplane mode. When you wake, resist the impulse to open the gate. Instead, choose the first influence on your mind deliberately. It could be as small as 3 slow breaths, a sip of water in silence, a short line from a book, or a thought of gratitude. The act itself doesn't matter nearly as much as the principle. You decide what enters first. Once you begin doing this, mornings change. Instead of stumbling into the day already surrounded by noise, you start from a place of calm authority. And in a world where everyone's attention is constantly under siege, this one habit becomes a rare form of freedom. And because here's the truth, whoever controls the first hour of your day controls your mind. If you leave the gate unguarded, you live scattered. If you guard it, you live centered. And from that center, you will be far better prepared for whatever the day may bring. Part 3: The Power of Morning Reflection. The first light of day is not only a time for action, it is also a time for stillness. The Stoics believed that before stepping into the world, you must step first into yourself. Marcus Aurelius began many mornings not by rushing to decisions, but by writing quietly in his journal, not for history, not for praise, but for himself. Those notes were his way of preparing the mind before Rome demanded his attention. And why this ritual? Because reflection is how you prepare for reality. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." Reflection was his way of reclaiming time before it slipped away. By rehearsing the possible difficulties of the day, he was less shaken when they actually arrived. Reflection was not idle thought, it was armor. Modern psychology confirms this ancient wisdom. In cognitive behavioral therapy, there is a method called cognitive rehearsal. By imagining potential challenges and practicing your response ahead of time, you reduce their power when they come. The brain stops treating them as ambushes and begins to treat them as rehearsed events. Reflection in this sense is not passive musing but active training for the mind. You don't need to be a philosopher or a therapist to know the value of this. Picture a parent in the quiet of dawn sipping coffee before waking the children. In those minutes, they think through the day ahead, the hectic commute, the deadlines, the inevitable tantrums. Instead of dreading them, they imagine themselves responding with patience. When those challenges appear hours later, they are steadier because they have already lived them once in their mind. Or consider a student before exams. Instead of lying in bed replaying fears of failure, they take 10 minutes each morning to breathe and write. Today I will face questions I don't know. I will stay calm, I will do what I can. When the exam paper is in front of them, the anxiety is still there, but it no longer rules them. Reflection gave them a script to follow instead of chaos. There's also a neurological reason mornings matter. When you first wake, your brain is in a theta state, the same state reached in meditation or creative flow. It is a window of heightened receptivity. Whatever you plant there, anxiety or clarity, grows strong roots throughout the day. Morning reflection is nothing more than the conscious planting of seeds. How do you begin? The Stoics would say, keep it simple. You don't need an hour. Even 5 minutes can change the tone of the day. You might write a short note to yourself like Marcus did. Today I will meet impatience and selfishness, but I will not let them disturb me. Or you might ask yourself 3 guiding questions. What do I expect to face today? How do I choose to respond? What kind of person do I want to be? This isn't philosophy in the abstract, it is practical preparation. Over time, these reflections shape not only your mornings but your character. You stop stumbling into your days unprepared. You begin walking into them with calm awareness, and you notice something remarkable. The challenges don't disappear, but their power over you weakens. The Stoics treated reflection as a forge. You do not wait until battle to build your shield. You prepare it in advance. Each morning is that forge, and with every reflection, you strengthen the quiet armor no one can take from you. Part 4. The discipline of the body. The Stoics never separated the mind from the body. To them, philosophy was not an abstract exercise in thought. It was a way of life, grounded in physical discipline as much as mental clarity. Epictetus, who had been born a slave and walked with a permanent limp, often reminded his students that strength of soul could not flourish in a body left to weakness and indulgence. He insisted that mastery of the self required mastery of the vessel through which the self moved. Seneca echoed this in his letters, advising not to pamper the body with endless comforts but to train it for endurance. He believed occasional hardship, fasting, cold baths, physical exertion was a rehearsal for life's inevitable trials. We should practice adversity, he wrote, not to torture ourselves but to harden ourselves. The point was never punishment, it was preparation. Modern psychology and neuroscience validate this Stoic wisdom. Regular physical activity is now known to be one of the most reliable ways to regulate mood and reduce anxiety. Exercise stimulates endorphins and strengthens the brain's resilience against stress. When you push your body in deliberate discomfort, a run, a cold shower, even a set of deep breaths held longer than feels easy, you train your nervous system not to panic at discomfort, but to relax into it. In cognitive behavioral terms, this is exposure therapy. By choosing small, controlled challenges, you build confidence that larger ones will not destroy you. Think of Muhammad Ali, the legendary boxer. Every morning his training began before dawn. For Ali, discipline of the body was not merely about athletic greatness, it was about shaping his identity. He famously said, "I hated every minute of training, but I said don't quit." Suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion. His morning discipline forged not only a champion's body, but also a philosopher's resilience. Like a Stoic, he embraced hardship not as an enemy, but as a teacher. When you bring discipline to your body in the morning, you create a ritual of resilience. This does not mean punishing yourself with impossible routines. It means deliberately choosing one act that strengthens your relationship with discomfort. It could be 10 push-ups, a brisk walk, a stretch held for 30 seconds longer than comfort allows. It could be rising to drink a glass of cold water instead of scrolling through your phone. The specific act matters less than the principle. You remind yourself before the world tests you that you are capable of facing difficulty and not breaking. There is also a spiritual element to this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you have trouble getting out of bed in the morning, remember that your nature is to work. Why then are you reluctant to do what you were born for?" He framed the simple act of rising not as a burden, but as a fulfillment of nature's law. The body is meant to move to serve the mind, to engage with the world. To deny it that discipline is to deny yourself harmony. Consider how different your mornings feel when your first physical action is one of discipline rather than indulgence. Rising immediately instead of snoozing, splashing your face with cold water instead of scrolling social media, stretching your muscles instead of collapsing into the chair. These small acts set the tone. They whisper to your subconscious, "I am in command of my body. Therefore, I am in command of myself." Over time, this practice expands beyond the body. The one who can master the urge to stay in bed can also master the urge to lash out in anger, to reach for excess, to fold under pressure. The discipline of the body is the seed from which the discipline of the soul grows. So each morning, treat your body as the Stoics did, as an ally in the pursuit of wisdom. Give it the discipline it needs, and it will return the favor with strength, clarity, and resilience. The body you command becomes the foundation for the mind you aspire to. Part 5. Guarding the gate of the mind. Seneca once cautioned, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." In those few words lies a warning that feels eerily modern. Your mind, left unguarded, is like a fortress whose gates are flung wide open. Anything, fear, gossip, outrage, distraction, can march in unchallenged and take command of your inner citadel. And if you are not the one deciding what enters, then the world, with all its noise and demands, will happily decide for you. The problem, of course, is that the world has no interest in your peace. Think of the first fragile moments after you wake. Your mind is still soft, still impressionable, like clay that has not yet hardened in the sun. And what do most people do with that clay? They reach for the phone. Before their feet even touch the floor, their eyes are flooded with notifications, headlines, and other people's emergencies. Each one is like a stone hurled against the walls of your fortress. Suddenly, before you have taken a single intentional breath, you are no longer sovereign over your own day. You are reacting, defending, submitting to battles that were never yours to fight. The Stoics would call this madness. Epictetus taught his students what he called the discipline of assent. His lesson was simple but radical. Just because an impression arises in your mind does not mean you must accept it as true. Just because an emotion stirs does not mean you must be carried away by it. There is a pause, a space, a sacred gap between stimulus and response, and in that gap lies your freedom. Modern psychology echoes this wisdom through cognitive reframing and mindfulness. Observe the thought without fusing with it, witness the emotion without drowning in it, and you discover that you are larger than both. Consider the example of Barack Obama during his presidency. Few positions in the world are subjected to such a relentless flood of crises, criticism, and demands. Yet those close to him often remarked on his calm demeanor, especially in the mornings. Obama carved out protected time at the start of each day for reading and reflection. No phone, no immediate meetings, no frantic rush to react. He chose what entered his mind first, carefully guarding the gate before opening himself to the storms of public life. This discipline helped him remain steady under pressure, responding with reason rather than impulse. His practice reflects the very principle the Stoics urged. Sovereignty over one's inner life begins with vigilance at the gate. Guarding your mind is not about cutting yourself off from the world, it is about curation. Just as a wise ruler would not allow every voice in the court to influence decisions, you cannot allow every voice, digital, emotional, or imagined, to occupy your mental throne. You must decide what is worthy of entering. Will you allow outrage, gossip, and fear to be the first guests in your home each morning, or will you invite wisdom, reflection, and purpose instead? A Stoic morning is not austere exile, it is strategy. Marcus Aurelius began his mornings not by pretending the day would be easy, but by preparing for its inevitable challenges. He reminded himself, today you will meet people who are selfish, unjust, ungrateful. But he did not let this thought corrode his spirit. Instead, he reframed it, they cannot harm me, for we are made for cooperation. His mind remained sovereign because he had already chosen what lens to see the world through. He named reality without surrendering to it. That was his gatekeeping. You too can begin to guard your mornings with intention. Replace the reflexive scroll with a brief meditation, a passage from Marcus, or even a few deep breaths in silence. Neuroscience tells us that the brain's prefrontal cortex, the seat of decision-making, is most malleable in those first waking minutes. Like wet clay, it takes on the shape of whatever impression you feed it. pour chaos into it and chaos hardens. Pour clarity and clarity sets. Imagine the shift if you chose deliberately. When a fearful thought arrives, you ask, is this true? Is it useful? If not, you let it pass like a stranger knocking on the gates but never entering. When distraction demands entry, you pause to consider, does this serve me? You do not slam the gates shut against all things, you simply decide who is allowed to cross the threshold. And that decision makes you the ruler of your own mind. Guard your mornings and you guard your life, for when the first act of the day is chosen by you, not imposed by the noise of the world, you stand as sovereign over your attention. And in that sovereignty lies a profound Stoic freedom, the power to remain unshaken, no matter what storms come to pound at your gates. Part 6. The Morning Rehearsal of Death. Every morning, Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. For the Stoics, death was not a morbid obsession, but a clarifying teacher. To remember mortality at dawn was to strip away trivial concerns and sharpen your sense of what truly mattered. Modern culture tends to hide death from view, treating it as a distant possibility rather than a certainty. But when you begin your morning with the awareness of your finitude, you suddenly see your day differently. The quarrel you are holding onto, the fear of what someone thinks of you, the hesitation to begin your work, all of these lose their power. Death reframes them. What seemed heavy becomes light. What seemed urgent becomes irrelevant. What seemed impossible becomes worth daring because you know time is slipping away whether you act or not. In psychology, this practice is called mortality salience, awareness of death that paradoxically often leads people to live more authentically. Research shows that when people are reminded of their mortality, they tend to prioritize values, deepen relationships, and pursue goals that hold personal meaning rather than shallow approval. The Stoics discovered this truth 2,000 years ago, and they made it a daily ritual. Consider Steve Jobs, who openly credited this Stoic insight as a guiding principle. In his famous Stanford address, he revealed that for decades, he looked in the mirror each morning and asked himself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? When the answer was no too many days in a row, he knew something had to change. That confrontation with death gave him courage to abandon comfort, take risks, and create boldly. This does not mean you must dwell in sorrow at dawn. It means you remember your fragility in order to heighten your gratitude. Seneca advised, let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. By rehearsing death in the morning, you free yourself to live with urgency and presence. You stop hoarding time as though you had an infinite supply. You start spending it on what matters, practically. This can be as simple as taking a minute upon waking to whisper to yourself, if this were my last sunrise, how would I live today? Far from darkening your mood, such a question can awaken you to joy. The sunlight feels warmer. The voice of a loved one sounds more precious. Even ordinary tasks become infused with meaning because you recognize they are not guaranteed to return tomorrow. This morning confrontation with mortality also equips you to endure difficulties. When you realize life is short, inconveniences shrink. The long line, the traffic, the petty criticism, they no longer dominate your emotional state. You see them as small because compared to death, everything is small, and when larger tragedies do strike, the daily rehearsal of death prevents you from being caught completely off guard. You have already practiced the acceptance of the inevitable. You do not collapse when the truth arrives, you meet it with readiness. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations not to avoid thoughts of death, but to let them strengthen him. It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. Each morning you remember death. You recommit to life. You choose action over delay, presence over distraction, courage over fear. Imagine what would change if you began tomorrow with this practice. How many words left unsaid would be spoken? How many dreams postponed would finally be pursued? How much unnecessary bitterness would be released? The rehearsal of death is not about dying each day. It is about being reborn into life with sharper vision, lighter burdens, and deeper urgency. When you carry mortality with you into the morning, you carry a compass that points unerringly toward what matters most. And with that compass in hand, your day ceases to be routine. It becomes sacred. Part 7. Anchoring in Gratitude and Awe. The Stoics believed that gratitude was not a fleeting emotion but a discipline, a practice that could anchor the restless soul. Marcus Aurelius urged himself each morning to remember the privilege of waking up. When you arise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to think, to enjoy, to love. This was not sentimental decoration. It was survival wisdom for a world that was often harsh, indifferent, and unpredictable. And when you ground yourself in gratitude, the storms of life do not vanish, but they lose their power to drown you. Pain still comes, loss still cuts, but gratitude reframes the experience. It shifts your gaze from scarcity to abundance, from despair to resilience. Modern psychology confirms what the Stoics intuited centuries ago. Practices of gratitude strengthen the immune system, reduce symptoms of depression, and improve relationships. Neuroscience even shows that gratitude activates the brain's reward circuits, gradually rewiring you toward hope rather than helplessness. For the Stoics, gratitude was a kind of cognitive armor. Seneca wrote, "Nothing is more honorable than a grateful heart." Gratitude shields you not by pretending suffering doesn't exist, but by refusing to let it dominate the whole picture. You may suffer illness, but still marvel at the breath that sustains you. You may lose someone dear, but still be thankful for the moments you shared. In this way, gratitude is not denial, it is defiance against despair. This is vividly reflected in the life of Jane Goodall, the renowned primatologist and environmentalist. She spent decades in the forests of Gom, Tanzania, studying chimpanzees. Her life was not free from hardship, isolation, criticism from skeptics, and the grief of witnessing deforestation and species decline could have embittered her. Yet she chose a posture of gratitude and awe. Again and again, she described waking at dawn to the chorus of birds or watching a chimpanzee tenderly care for her young as moments of profound privilege. Even in the face of ecological crisis, Goodall expressed gratitude for the chance to bear witness and to contribute, however modestly, to the protection of life. Her example reflects a Stoic truth. By focusing on the wonder that remains, you sustain the courage to keep acting, even when circumstances are bleak. Gratitude naturally opens into awe. To the Stoics, awe was not a luxury, but a necessity for perspective. Marcus Aurelius often looked upward at the stars to remind himself of his small but meaningful place in the cosmos. Awe dissolves the prison of self-absorption. Modern research echoes this. Psychologists find that awe diminishes ego, lowers stress, and increases compassion. When you gaze at the ocean or lose yourself in the immensity of a starry night, you feel both small and expanded, humbled, yet somehow uplifted. Awe is humility made luminous. Anchoring in gratitude and awe also transforms the daily irritations that so often consume you. When you begin your day by naming even the smallest blessings, the warmth of your bed, the presence of a loved one, the gift of consciousness itself, you become less vulnerable to the petty frustrations that follow. A cutting remark, a traffic jam, or a small failure cannot dominate your mood because your mind has already been framed in abundance rather than scarcity. The Stoic practice of gratitude was not naive optimism. They did not close their eyes to the cruelties of life. Instead, they resisted the corrosive bitterness that can rot the soul from within. Epictetus urged, "Do not seek to have events happen as you want them to, but instead want them to happen as they do, and your life will go well." Gratitude at its highest level is not just for the pleasant, but also for the painful, for trials that shape your character, for hardships that refine your endurance. In practice, this does not require grand gestures. It may be as simple as writing 3 things you are thankful for each morning. It may be pausing at dusk to notice the colors of the sky. It may be silently thanking a difficult colleague for teaching you patience, or an unexpected setback for sharpening your resolve. Each act roots you deeper in the present moment and makes you less fragile before the chaos of life. To anchor yourself in gratitude and awe is to tether your spirit to something immovable. You no longer drift helplessly with every wave of frustration or fear. Instead, you carry an inner stillness, a quiet resilience. The more you practice it, the more each day feels like a gift, fragile, fleeting, but radiant in every breath. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Marcus Aurelius. These words are more than philosophy, they are a summons to action. You have spent this time reflecting on what it means to wake with clarity, to stand firm against distraction, to protect your mornings and thereby protect your life. And now the question is no longer theoretical, it is deeply personal. When you wake tomorrow, will you reach for the noise of the world? Or will you begin the day in silence, in strength, and in control of yourself? The Stoics remind you that mastery is not won in grand gestures, but in small, repeated choices. Modern psychology confirms it. Habits wire the brain. The way you start your morning sets the tone for your entire day. Each breath you take with awareness, each thought you examine before it controls you. Each decision to remain steady when the world wants you restless, all of these moments accumulate into a life that cannot be easily broken. So let this be your invitation. Try it tomorrow, wake with purpose, protect your first moments, and hold your calm like a sacred flame. Notice how much lighter you feel when you are not ruled by impulses but guided by intention. That is the Stoic secret, not to escape life, but to step fully into it with an unshakable calm. And if these words have stirred something in you, share your thoughts below. This is a community of those who seek strength, not noise. Subscribe to Unshakeable Calm, not for me, but for yourself, as a daily reminder that you are capable of living wiser, calmer, and freer. Your mornings are the doorway. The choice is yours.